The evening shift had already settled into its familiar pressure, the kind that never looked chaotic from the outside, but never truly relaxed inside. Monitors hummed, printers clicked, and the overhead lights gave everything the same flat color that erased time. The rookie nurse stood at the medication cart reviewing a chart, shoulders relaxed, posture straight without stiffness. 2 weeks in the department, and he still spoke less than anyone else. Across the station, the charge nurse watched him draw medication with careful precision, tapping the syringe once, aligning the measurement at eye level rather than guessing as some new staff did when the waiting room was full. "You'll slow yourself down doing it that way," she said, not unkindly. He only nodded and labeled the syringe before setting it into the tray. A paramedic crew rolled in a patient with chest pain, the usual controlled urgency. The rookie moved before being told, guiding the stretcher into the correct bay without bumping the doorway, clearing a path with a single quiet request rather than raised volume. He positioned the oxygen line so it would not tangle when the patient turned. Small things, unnoticed unless missing. Another nurse whispered to a colleague that he was too calm, as if calm were a form of inexperience. At triage, a clerk picked up a phone call and frowned. "Someone's causing trouble in the parking lot," she muttered, half to herself. The words drifted into the general noise and dissolved. The rookie nurse did not react outwardly, but his eyes shifted briefly toward the entrance, then back to the patient's breathing pattern. He finished attaching leads and stepped aside exactly when the physician entered, not late, not early, leaving space rather than occupying it. The physician glanced once at the vitals already recorded and paused for a fraction longer than usual. The shift continued. A child with a fever cried until he crouched to her eye level and handed her a sealed alcohol wipe to hold, giving her a task rather than comfort. She quieted. He rose without comment. Another call from the front desk came louder this time. Raised voices audible through the double doors, the uneven rhythm of someone arguing with security glass. Staff exchanged looks but continued working. Disturbances happened often and rarely crossed into the treatment area. The rookie nurse began moving equipment slightly inward, clearing the main walkway without explaining why. "You expecting a parade?" another nurse joked. He shook his head once and checked the wheels on a rolling monitor, locking them. The charge nurse noticed that and frowned, sensing intention she could not place. Through the glass corridor, a shadow lurched past, then returned. A hand slapped the door hard enough to echo through the hall. The crying child's mother turned. A patient on a gurney tried to sit upright. Still, the doors held. The rookie nurse adjusted the curtain of the nearest bay so it would not obstruct the line of sight from the station to the entrance. His movements remained economical, almost minimal, yet each left the central area clearer, safer. Another bang hit the glass, louder. The clerk stepped back from the desk. "Security's coming," she said, voice thin. The rookie nurse finally walked closer to the station, but stopped short of the doorway, positioning himself where the waiting area and treatment floor met. Not confronting, not retreating. Watching. His gaze tracked the rhythm of impacts rather than the noise itself, measuring spacing between them. The charge nurse felt an unease she could not explain. "It's just another intoxicated patient," someone said, though no one sounded convinced. The rookie nurse loosened his grip slightly, flexing his fingers once as if checking circulation, then rested his hands loosely at his sides. The overhead lights hummed on. For a brief moment, the department fell into a strange half-silence, machines steady, people waiting without knowing they were waiting. Then the handle jerked violently downward. The rookie nurse inhaled slowly, not deeply, and shifted his weight half a step forward, placing himself quietly between the doors and the nearest occupied bed. He said nothing. He did not call security. He simply stood where the next movement would matter. The handle snapped downward, and the doors slammed inward hard enough to strike the stopper with a hollow metallic crack. The man staggered across the threshold with momentum he could not fully control, one shoulder colliding with the wall before he corrected himself. Blood ran from a shallow scalp cut into his eyebrow, mixing with sweat and alcohol. The smell entered the room before his voice did. "I need a doctor now!" he shouted, then immediately shoved a rolling stool aside as if the room itself had insulted him. The stool struck a cabinet and toppled a Sharps container, plastic clattering across tile. Conversations died mid-sentence. The crying child went silent. The rookie nurse did not move toward him yet. He shifted only enough to keep a straight path between the man and the occupied beds. Security was still somewhere in the corridor behind the waiting room. The man paced 3 uneven steps, scanning faces until he locked onto the nearest staff member, a young intern who instinctively stepped backward. "Don't you walk away from me!" he barked, pointing with a trembling finger that failed to hold direction. The rookie nurse angled his body slightly, not confronting, simply existing in the line the man would have to cross. "Sir," the charge nurse began carefully, palms visible, "we'll help you if you lower your voice." The man laughed sharply and swept an arm across the counter, sending a clipboard and pen skidding to the floor. The rookie nurse watched the man's feet rather than his hands, tracking balance corrections delayed by intoxication, the sway that preceded sudden lunges. He noted the breathing, fast but irregular, and the way the man blinked unevenly, depth perception compromised. A police siren echoed faintly somewhere outside, distant, not immediate. The man grabbed the edge of the nurse's station and leaned over it, shouting about waiting times, about pain, about disrespect, words blurring together without sequence. The rookie nurse quietly reached behind him and slid a tray of instruments out of arm's reach without drawing attention. Another nurse whispered, "Where is security?" No one answered. The man kicked a waste bin and it struck the wall near a patient's bed. The patient flinched violently. The rookie nurse stepped once to his left, placing himself fully between that bed and the aggressor. Not defensive, positioned. The man noticed him then, really noticed him, eyes narrowing as if recognizing a target that would not scatter. "You," he said, pointing again, finger wavering inches left and right before settling. "You think you're tough standing there?" The rookie nurse's expression did not change. "You're bleeding," he said evenly, voice low enough that the man had to focus to hear it. The sentence slowed the man for half a second, just long enough to disrupt the rhythm of rage. "Then fix it!" he snapped, and stepped forward too fast for his balance, catching himself on the counter with a loud bang. The rookie nurse did not retreat. He shifted 1 foot back, weight lowering slightly, hands relaxed at midline rather than raised. Staff watched the posture without understanding why it felt deliberate. The man's eyes flicked toward a metal IV pole beside the corridor entrance. His hand moved toward it, uncertain whether for support or leverage. The rookie nurse's gaze followed before the fingers touched it. "Stay where you are," the charge nurse ordered, voice firmer now, but the man ignored her completely, focus locked on the quiet figure who had not moved away. The room narrowed around them, the noise of monitors suddenly louder in the absence of conversation. The man advanced, shoulders forward, anger condensing into direction rather than volume. "You going to stop me?" he asked, words slurred but intent clear. The rookie nurse said nothing. He adjusted half a step so the man's path forced a turn, subtly removing the direct line toward the patients behind him. The man lunged, not fast, but committed, arm swinging to shove. The rookie nurse's eyes tracked the shoulder before the arm even rose. Everyone else saw the movement begin. He had already decided where it would end. The shove never landed the way the man intended. As his weight committed forward, the rookie nurse stepped slightly inside the arc rather than away from it, his left hand guiding the man's wrist past his own torso, while his right forearm rose under the elbow. The motion looked small, almost accidental, but the man's balance disappeared instantly. Momentum carried him forward into emptiness his body could not correct. The nurse rotated with him instead of resisting, redirecting force downward and sideways so the man's knees buckled without impact. A startled grunt replaced the shout. Before anyone processed the turn, the nurse's knee touched the floor beside the man's shoulder, not on him, anchoring position, while his hands controlled the arm in a firm joint angle that prevented striking but did not wrench. The man struggled once, then stopped, confusion overtaking anger as movement no longer produced power. The nurse adjusted his grip a fraction to keep circulation open, fingers pressing lightly along the wrist to confirm pulse. "Do not fight," he said quietly, voice level, breathing steady. The man attempted to twist, but each effort met the same absence of leverage. The hold was not painful. It was final. Staff stared, frozen between intervening and witnessing. The nurse shifted his weight again, preventing the man's head from contacting the tile, guiding his cheek sideways so his airway remained clear. "You're bleeding from the scalp," he added calmly, as if continuing triage instead of ending a confrontation. The man's chest heaved, adrenaline meeting alcohol in uneven bursts. The nurse waited for the rhythm to slow before tightening control enough to stop another surge, never striking, never raising his voice. A monitor alarm beeped from a nearby bed, and another nurse rushed to silence it, breaking the spell but not the focus. The restrained man tried one last time to push upward, but the angle removed strength from his shoulder. He exhaled sharply and sagged. The nurse eased pressure slightly, maintaining position while checking pupils with a quick penlight taken from his pocket, without releasing control. "Stay still," he instructed, tone unchanged, and the man, disoriented more than defeated, obeyed. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. Security arriving late, breathless, slowing when they saw the scene already contained. They hesitated, unsure where to assist. "Call police medical," the charge nurse said, voice quieter now. The rookie nurse nodded once without looking up, attention still on breathing rate and responsiveness. He guided the man's free hand away from his own chest to prevent sudden flailing, then repositioned the shoulder so joints aligned naturally rather than strained. The hold transformed from restraint into stabilization, indistinguishable except for control. When officers entered moments later, they found the man conscious, no longer shouting, pinned not by force, but by geometry. One officer paused, recognition flickering across his face at the precision of the position, then said nothing. The nurse only looked up briefly and said, "He may have a concussion," before returning his focus to keeping the airway open and the pulse steady as if this had always been medical care and nothing else. The officers approached carefully, reading the stillness before touching it. One crouched opposite the nurse and reached for the restrained wrist, pausing when he felt the exact angle already preventing resistance without pressure on the joint. "We've got him," the officer said quietly. The nurse did not release immediately. "He's dizzy and his breathing is irregular," he replied, eyes still on the man's chest rise. Only when the officer nodded and positioned cuffs within the same safe alignment did the nurse ease his grip, guiding the arm into place rather than letting it fall. The transition looked rehearsed, though no words coordinated it. As the officers secured the man, the nurse shifted back onto his heels and finally exhaled deeper than before, one controlled breath leaving him slower than the rest. A faint tremor moved through his fingers and stopped just as quickly. The restrained man muttered incoherently, anger replaced by confusion, and the nurse leaned forward again to check his pupils a second time. "Possible head impact before arrival," he said to no one in particular, then to the charge nurse, "We should scan him." She nodded automatically, still studying him with a new, searching focus. One officer stood and looked at the nurse longer than necessary. "You trained?" he asked, tone neutral but knowing. The nurse wiped a small smear of blood from his sleeve with gauze. "I work somewhere busy," he answered simply. The officer held the gaze a moment, then gave a slight nod that carried more recognition than agreement, and stepped away. The staff began to move again, sound returning to the room in fragments. Monitors, rolling carts, distant phones. Only now did someone notice the nurse's posture tighten briefly as he stood. He pressed his palm lightly against his side, as if testing a bruise, and then dropped his hand. No complaint followed. He helped lift the restrained man onto a stretcher, adjusting the head support to keep the airway open, speaking to him in the same even voice used minutes earlier when chaos filled the room. "You're safe. Stay still." The man did. As they wheeled him toward imaging, the nurse walked beside the stretcher, not leading, not following, simply ensuring the IV line did not snag on the doorway. The charge nurse stopped him after. "You're hurt," she said quietly. He glanced down once as if surprised by the possibility. "I'm fine," he replied, though a shallow breath betrayed discomfort before he steadied it. She studied him, then nodded slowly. No applause came, no congratulations, only a subtle clearing of space around him that had not existed before. He returned to the station and began charting the incident in precise, unemotional language, documenting the patient's condition rather than the confrontation. A senior physician passed behind him and paused, reading the screen for a second longer than routine before continuing without comment. Near the exit, the officer who had spoken earlier stopped and looked back. Their eyes met briefly. The officer gave a small, almost formal inclination of the head. The nurse returned to typing, recording vitals, time, and treatment, leaving out everything that did not belong in a medical report. By the time the doors settled back into their usual rhythm, the department had already absorbed the incident into routine. A floor technician replaced the cracked plastic bin. Environmental services wiped a faint streak of dried blood from the tile until the reflection returned to the fluorescent sheen. Conversations resumed in low tones, but they bent around the nurse's station now, giving the rookie nurse a wider path without acknowledging why. He remained seated, finishing the final lines of charting with the same measured pace he had used all night, documenting neurological checks and response times rather than actions taken to subdue the patient. The charge nurse reviewed the entry over his shoulder and said nothing for several seconds. "You wrote exactly what mattered," she said at last. He saved the record and logged out. A new patient arrived complaining of abdominal pain, and he took the vitals without hesitation, voice steady, hands precise, as if the previous hour had been another routine task. Down the corridor, the restrained man was returned from imaging calmer, eyes clearer, anger dissolved into embarrassment and fatigue. The rookie nurse adjusted his blanket and checked the IV site, treating him with identical care to any other patient. The man avoided eye contact and whispered a rough apology that the nurse acknowledged only with a nod before checking pupil response again. No lecture followed. No mention of the struggle remained between them. Near the end of the shift, the senior physician approached quietly and stood beside him, watching the monitor's update. "You kept him from hurting anyone," she said. He shrugged once, a small motion limited by stiffness in his ribs. "He needed treatment," he replied. She studied him briefly, recognition forming but unspoken, then signed the chart and walked away. At the far end of the hall, the officer from earlier returned to collect a report. He paused beside the station. "Good control tonight," he said softly, not for the room to hear. The nurse met his eyes for a moment and gave the slightest shake of his head, declining the compliment. The officer understood and left without adding more. Dawn light began to bleed faintly through the high windows, turning the sterile white walls pale gray. The night staff prepared handover notes. When the day shift arrived, the charge nurse introduced the rookie nurse simply by name, nothing more. No story accompanied it. He gathered his bag, checked one last patient monitor, and ensured the hallway remained clear before heading toward the locker room. Behind him, the department continued, Phones ringing, carts moving, new problems replacing old ones. His role in the disturbance reduced to a line in a medical record and a memory carried quietly by those who